Everybody, Uneducated Economist here. So in today's video, we are going to talk about how it is that Jerome Powell has essentially been locked into place. Like, he is not going anywhere, and I'm going to discuss how it is that that's going to be the possibility going into the future, considering some of the things that are coming out of the administration and the Department of Justice and his term coming to an end and all these efforts to try and remove him and hurry up and get to the end of his term so that there can be a new chairman coming into the Federal Reserve so that all this interest rate adjustments can then take place. We have the biggest credible threat yet to talk about when it comes to the removal of Jerome Powell. This is something that you'll probably not hear anywhere. When it comes to the backfire, like a lot of people are saying, oh man, it's going to backfire on Trump. And the idea behind this is like the Senate isn't going to confirm a new Fed chair, right? And that the Federal Reserve, in order to remain independent and not being bullied around, is going to keep interest rates elevated. And so this is kind of like the idea of how it's backfired on Trump in his attempt to try and get the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates. This is ultimately going to have the exact opposite effect. And this is what a lot of people are saying. Now, if you look at it that way, it makes a lot of sense and it's pretty logical. However, it goes so much deeper on a level that not a lot of people are ever going to think or even realize is taking place. So much so that this could literally lock Jerome Powell into his position permanently. That's right. Permanently. Like, he won't be removed even after his term has come to an end. Even after his term as a governor has come to an end. See, like, he can only be on the chairman, or he can only be the chairman of the Fed until May. And then he's a governor until 2028. And now most of the time, the chairman, when they're done with their position of being chairman, they just essentially move away from the Federal Reserve. But they don't have to. They can finish out their term as a governor. Now, the situation we face here with Jerome Powell and the fact that the Trump administration has pushed so hard to try and remove him, now you've got the Senate literally pushing against the idea, saying we are not going to confirm any chairman so long as you have this investigation going. Now, this brings up a particular law, all right? Now, this comes out, I left a link down in the description, right? And U.S. Code Title 12, Banks and Banking 242, ineligible to hold office in member banks, qualifications and term of office of members and chairman of the vice chairman and oath of office. Okay, so it goes into this big long deal about it, but it has this little portion to say, and I think this is critical. Upon the expiration of their term of office, more members of the board shall continue to serve until their successors are appointed and have qualified. Upon the expiration of their terms of office, when they are done, when their term is over, when the chairman's term is over, and even as the governor, his term in 2028, when his terms of office have expired, members of the board shall continue. They shall continue to operate, shall continue to serve until their successors are appointed and have qualified. If they are never appointed and qualified, then the previous member, regardless of how his expiration or the date of his expiration, can continue to serve until a qualified has been appointed. Do you see what's happened here? This is incredible to think about. All right. Let me make sure everything's going good here on the stream. Yeah. So when I think about what it is that comes to a credible threat, it's not just the credible threat of whether or not the Federal Reserve has independence, right? That's a whole credible threat within its own. Like, if the Fed has independence, if it doesn't have independence, that's either going to be a loosening or tightening of financial conditions. It's going to raise or lower the interest rates based on this idea of the Fed's independence. But what a lot of people are not realizing is that if they go down this particular road with the Department of Justice and this investigation, and the Senate says, hey, as long as you have this investigation going, we are not going to appoint anybody. And if there's nobody that it's appointed, then the sitting member, regardless of the expiration of his term, will continue to serve. This nobody knows about. This is very, very rare for anybody to discuss this particular portion of the situation we now face. See, I saw everybody out there really discussing what it is that's going to happen when Jerome Powell leaves office or leaves his position as chairman of the Federal Reserve, and I think to myself, nothing. Right? Nothing is going to change because you have to change all the rest of the FOMC. But think about the market's expectations and the interpretation of what it is that's happening within the economy. If there is a position in which that the Federal Reserve chairman cannot be removed, even after his term expires. It's not like he couldn't be removed. He could be removed. He doesn't get removed. He just stays there continuously, even after his term has come to an end. Talk about the credible threat of that. That would send people's minds spinning. And this is a real situation that could come and is leading up to, right? Like, I'm not saying it's happening. I'm saying this could happen. And there's a law that is already set in place to create this sort of outcome. How many people have taken this into consideration? Very few. Very few. See, this is why following the credible threat theory is by far the most accurate one, because we dive deep. We dive deep into the situation. We go much deeper than what most people will look at for surface level problems, especially following the mainstream media narrative. Right? How many other people are going to think about this as an actual situation to face going into the future? None. Right? Thanks for being here. Great. Powell will still serve on board. All right. I'm shocked you even thought of that scenario to keep Powell in. Borderline genius. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And it's not me being a genius and thinking of it. It's me doing the research and understanding the Fed's real position in which that they are attempting to do. Most of the stuff that I read and think about when it comes to other people's communications is conspiratorial. They are not following the Fed's words. It was easy for me to find this information because I'm not listening to the BS that's out there. I'm looking for my own info, my own research, my own understanding of the current situation. That's why I sound so different from every single person out there, and why it is that I'm able to deliver information like this is because I'm not bogged down with the belief system that is completely fabricated through narrative that is distributed through mainstream media propagation. I'm just not there. I'm not. Like, I don't know. I can't be there. I can't see it that way because I'm looking way beyond that. Right? I see that stuff that most people are looking at as the monetary policy itself. And they're like, yeah, we're all discussing monetary policy. And I'm like, no, you're being manipulated with that as monetary policy. Right? And this is the way they're doing it. Like, I'm not saying Jerome Powell is going to be stuck in this position forever. I'm not going to say that. What I am saying is there's a real credible threat that he could, and that can be deployed. Right? That information that he can be literally permanently in that position can be deployed. It doesn't mean it will. It could be. We understand it. We know it. We know it for the situation it now faces, and we can internalize it for the reality of it. Most people will never hear this. Then you got to think, really, like, you're probably right now we have 81 people watching this live stream. It may get 1,000, 2,000 views by after it's posted. Think about that. We are 2,000 people, the only ones who really know this stuff. Like, there's obviously some lawyers out there, and there's some people who definitely have the understanding that this is the situation, but you're not going to find it out there on Fox News, CNBC, CNN, MSNBC. It doesn't matter where you go, you're not going to find it. right? Because if that was deployed, it would be used as propagandized information to manipulate the situation. That's why they're not going to talk about it yet. They don't need it yet. They don't need it. All right, I don't think too many people under 70 are listening to legacy media. You are the mainstream media, Simon. I appreciate it. The market wants to hear rates will fall. The reality might be different, but that doesn't seem to matter. Yeah, I agree. But then again, most people don't realize what's going on when rates are falling. That means that the economy is not doing well. Like if the Federal Reserve is cutting rates, that's a bad sign. That's not a good sign. It means that they're trying to get economic activity moving. They're trying to support the labor market. That's bad. When people are cheering for that, that's bad idea. It's like cheering for the house to be on fire or something. I don't know. Like it's a bad idea. And I don't know good or bad. That's an incorrect way of saying it. Most people don't realize that the situation that the Federal Reserve is facing is one of desperately trying to accommodate when they lower rates. That's the only way to look at it, because whether or not how you position yourself is good or bad. Jerome Powell influences with the Fed will still last beyond him stepping down as Fed chair. It's about the collective vote of the Fed, not just one person like the president believes. Yeah, and I agree with that. I don't know how much necessarily influence he's going to have, but he'll definitely have a voice, very much like Ben Bernanke has a voice or Alan Greenspan has a voice. Their communications will be heard, they will be interpreted, they will be listened to, and maybe communicated out there on the mainstream media. But as far as the Federal Reserve necessarily using them as conducting the monetary policy and having influence on that monetary policy, I think that might be quite limited to the Federal Reserve, the FOMC, the advisors, the people who are working within the Fed itself. Like, they retired, right? They're just more observing the Fed and communicating about it than they are actually working the Fed influence, I would think. Like they might, I don't know. Maybe it was just like, hey Ben, what's happening, bud? Jerome. Just wanted to ask you about a couple questions. Like, I'm sure that happens. Let's move on here. I also remember in my history class learning about how Richard Nixon pressuring the Fed chair of his time to cut rates at a time when rates didn't need to be cut and it caused hyperinflation. Okay. It didn't cause hyperinflation, it caused elevated inflation, and it caused a lot of it. Hyperinflation is something much different, and so we should probably, describe it for the reality of it. It wasn't hyperinflation, it was heavy inflation that was happening back during the day. And we also have to understand a couple of situations that we were facing back then that wasn't necessarily something that could be avoided. And one of those things is that the United States being on a gold standard worked out really well for our standard of living. Like we kicked it, right? We were kicking it really well. We produced all the world's greatest stuff, sent that stuff out there to the world, and the world sent us their money, and that money was gold, right? And so we raised our standard of living on account of how hard we worked, produced, sent that stuff out there to the world, and the world sending us their money. We had a great standard of living on account of that. The only problem is that we started to deprive the rest of the world of gold because we were hoarding it, just like the Cantillon effect describes, right? So once you start hoarding onto the gold, there comes a situation in which that you peak out on that hoarding and you start relinquishing the gold back out there to the rest of the world. That right there was going to be very devastating to the American people, as there is no better feeling in the world than to raise your standard of living, and there's nothing more depressing than to lower it. So as we start to go into a position in which that we were going to be forced into lowering our standard of living as we relinquish the gold back out there to the rest of the world, Nixon said, nope, sever the gold standard, right? Now, I don't think that was necessarily his idea as much as it was as the monetary policy all coming together saying, we can just call it quits now, or we can try and attempt to be on a 100% fiat currency. Which one do you think we should do? And they were like, well, Let's not call it quits. So what do we do? All right. So Nixon went out there and he severed the gold standard and he says, we're going to be on a 100% fiat currency. And don't worry, we promise we won't print too much. Right? Good one. Anyway, so after that, we went on a 100% fiat currency and we continued to be the consumers in raising our standard of living. And that's the unfortunate consequences of the situation we now face with ever-increasing amounts of inequality, because ever-increasing amounts of new money separates the rich from the poor. And it's going to happen every time. So, like Nixon's fall, creating hyperinflation, all that other stuff, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I guess you can blame them or whatever. I mean, but really there was a situation we were facing that we either fall into pain and misery, poverty, because we continued to stay on the gold standard and relinquish the gold back out there to the rest of the world, or we get this, right? Which one did you want? Like, I don't know. Which one would have been better? I mean, to be honest with you, I think we probably should have stayed on the gold standard and taken the pain back then. But really, you know, we wouldn't be having all this awesomeness now that you get to experience, unless you're on the bottom side of the wedge. Oof, that's not good. Sucks, right? Once you see it, once you understand it for the reality, you're like, man, there ain't nobody to blame here, is there? I mean, you can. I don't know what it would do. Not sure what the difference would be. All right. I mean, it would be a painful experience in something else if you didn't position yourself correctly, much like today. All right. All right. Now we are paying our debt and Social Security recipients without hyperinflation. Hyperinflation equals when people have zero confidence in US dollars. Is that not the case? No. If you go and you look right now, there is more demand for US debt outside of this nation than there ever has been. Like, I don't care what China, like, China is a great example of a nation that's pissed and wants to get out of dollars. But the rest of the world is getting into dollars. And I don't care what BRICS nations are rising or what people are saying about that. There is more foreign holdings of US debt now than ever. Right? So now that's pretty crazy to think when the dollar has zero confidence. Is that what you really believe? That the world has zero confidence, but yet is willing to buy the records amount of dollar-denominated debt coming out of the United States? Eh? Does that seem, those two things seem equal? Zero confidence and record amounts of U.S. Treasury sales to foreign buyers? Those two aren't the same. Those are absolutely opposite. It is showing massive confidence in dollars. Mainstream media wouldn't believe that. People out there on the internet wouldn't tell you that. But if you just go and Google it yourself, U.S. foreign holdings of U.S. dollar, U.S. Treasury debt, there you go. Foreign holdings of U.S. Treasury debt, type in the word FRE, Federal Reserve. What does that stand for? Federal Reserve? I don't know. I can't remember what it stands for. Something Education Department? No, that's not what it stands for. I can't remember. But anyway, it's a Federal Reserve site that just about every single chart you could ever possibly imagine. And that's one of them. Right? So, no, there's absolute no way that the dollar is going anywhere, and there's more confidence for it than anybody would ever have possibly imagined. Like, they don't want to, but think about it. Every single person is putting investments into dollar-denominated assets. There's a few people who go into gold and silver. A few more go into cryptocurrencies. The rest of the world, what are they getting into, right? Dollar-denominated assets that are going to pay in dollars. U.S. treasuries that are going to pay in dollars. Countries like China issuing out debts that are due in dollars. There's demand for dollars, and the dollar isn't going to go anywhere. Can the Federal Reserve Act be changed to create a co-chair position? Well, I guess so. I mean, I mean, the possibilities of law changes could take place. Like that's not really like in question. Like they could create laws that are different, but that takes a serious effort, right? It's not like something that they can just like wave a magic wand and make happen. Simon, FRED stands for the Federal Reserve Economic Data. Thank you, Brody. I appreciate it. I can't believe I couldn't remember that. Sometimes I just, sometimes I just get stuck there. Okay, uneducated economist. Regarding the dollar, you can see the reflection in the DXY. It has been going up for 20 years, and the trend is up, even the last few weeks and months of trading. Yeah, and I've tried to share that with people as well, that if you just go and you look at like the dollar comparatively to the basket of world currencies that are out there, you're going to find that there is more demand for dollars, and the dollar is stronger against those other currencies more now than just about any time in history. I mean, was there times in history in which that it was stronger than it is today? Yeah, but not many, right? Just a few times. Most of the time it was much weaker than it is now. But that doesn't really go well. That to know that, like they're not going to tell people that when it comes to through the lens of the credible threat theory, they are never going to tell people that because that doesn't increase the inflation expectations. Right? That lowers the inflation expectations. So to hear people say that, right? To hear them say, man, the dollar is stronger comparatively to what anybody would ever think of out there, that doesn't do well for the monetary policy. If they want to ease financial conditions, it's not a matter of lowering the interest rates. That doesn't work. It's a matter of raising the inflation expectations. That raising of inflation lowers the real interest rates. That I know will blow people's minds when they hear it, but that's the reality of the situation. And so if you can raise the inflation and raise the inflation expectations, you will lower the real interest rates. This makes the economy less restricted. It adds to the stimulating effects. If you lower the Fed funds rate in relation to the neutral interest rate, you can make the economy less restricted. Now, if you tried to stimulate the economy with the lowering of Fed funds, you would have to drop it far enough below R star in order to stimulate. The problem that they would face, the Fed would face, is hitting the lower bound of zero because R star is about a half a percentage point. Half to 1.5, who knows where it actually is, but it's very low. And now in order for there to be a stimulating effect coming from the adjustment of the Fed funds rate, it has to get far enough below that R star. If you have elevated inflation and you lower the Fed funds rate, then you can get some stimulating effect out of it. Ever increasing amounts of inflation and inflation expectation lowers the real interest rates. If you already have low interest rates and you push an inflation expectation, you will get a lot of stimulus out of the economy. This is how they're operating now because the lowering of interest rates doesn't work. They can't get below R star without hitting the lower bound of zero. Stimulating the economy with the adjustment of interest rates does not work. It does not work now, and it will not work going into the future. That is so important to understand. It is very difficult. I get it. And I will explain it again sometime in the future because this is the only thing that I talk about because this is the appropriate monetary policy and the only view that is accurate. To see R star in relation to the inflation expectation positions the Fed funds rate. The more inflation expectation and inflationary scenario, the more of a reason for the elevated Fed funds rate. The moment that you remove the inflation, the Fed funds rate has to fall practically to zero in order to keep the economy from being restricted. If they tried to stimulate, they would hit the lower bound of zero. It's over. There is no stimulating effect that comes from monetary adjustment of interest rates. It does not work. You can get a tiny bit out of it if you have inflation. And that's for anybody who actually understands or researched or was educated on the Federal Reserve up until about 10, 15 years ago would be shaking their head, throwing stuff at the screen, calling me ignorant and stupid and that I don't know anything, because they literally have changed the way that they conduct themselves, and the way that people have been educated is literally being manipulated now. And I understand that the uneducated economist is the only one who seems to be talking about it, but I wasn't educated on how the Fed operates. I wasn't even educated in monetary policy in any way, shape, or form. Right? I went out there and I just did the research and kept reading on it and reading on it, trying to figure out what it was that they were doing using their own words, not some other school's interpretation of what it was that they were doing. I went right to the Fed and was listening to the FOMC speeches to try and figure out what was going on with monetary policy. This is what I discovered. I know most people who understand Federal Reserve actions, Federal Reserve monetary policy, they know the Federal Reserve in a way that is dated. And if you don't understand the way it was dated in the past form, then there's no way that you could understand it today. But if you are looking at the Federal Reserve today in the way that they had done it in the past, you are missing it. And that's what's so crazy, is that the communications that I hear and see out there are people who are literally looking at the Fed from a past form of communication in which that would have been appropriate. Like, I don't know how to describe it, but ultimately the people who are looking at the adjustment of the Fed funds rate as the monetary policy tool, as opposed to the communications about the interest rate adjustments, they're the ones who are literally the prominent people out there in the economy saying, oh, when the Fed adjusts rates, they're doing it because of whatever, blah, 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 right? And they're giving their reasons, which is very logical and makes a lot of sense, and it's very smart, and they're educated in it. So when they do communicate it, it sounds very appropriate. The only problem is that the monetary policy is literally the actions that are taking place in the communications of that, because that communication has a profound impact on the economy. Not the action itself, but the communication about it. And that's why it's working so well for them. Gaslit is the new economic policy and it works. You're absolutely right. Brent Johnson came up with that. It's just that a theory doesn't mean it's correct. The dollar milkshake theory is turning out to be pretty dang close, all right? Yeah. And I mean, to be honest with you, like the dollar milkshake theory, like that really, it was pretty good. And I don't know if you've ever seen Brent Johnson do that presentation live, his dollar milkshake presentation, where he absolutely tears. It's so good too. It's so good. He takes his theory and he disassembles it, like just absolutely trashes his theory in every way that you could, like argues against it and just destroys it, and then redoes the theory again with an argument that absolutely just seals the deal. Right? It is so good. It is such a good presentation. I love it. Anyway, moving on. So JP Morgan does or doesn't affect the Fed. Okay, well, that's a really good question, Deja Vu. I'm not going to say that they don't. What I'm going to say is that I can't find anything within their speeches, monetary policy, or anything else that then uses JP Morgan as anything as far as their like reasoning for voting in a particular way. Like, I've never seen any kind of communication like that. You know, now other people will push back against it and have all kinds of arguments on why that is inaccurate. What I'm not trying to push against that. What I'm saying is I can't find anything within the Fed's own statements that would then lend value to that sort of belief. Yeah. And again, I'm not saying that it's invaluable, like it's not real. I'm just saying I can't find it, and so therefore I'm not going to internalize it as if it is. You know. JP Morgan is the largest shareholder of the Fed, I think. they basically started the Fed. Yeah, basically they did. It was J.P. Morgan, the man, and a bunch of his rich crony buddies who got together and hashed out the details of the federal, like the Creature from Jekyll Island explains that really well. Like that's the part of the Creature of Jekyll Island that I so appreciate and love about it, is that understanding how the Federal Reserve came into its creation and existence and all that other stuff is really good. Like that portion of the book I think is outstanding. And I think really everything within the book is. My pushback on things is that that book doesn't necessarily describe the current situation we now face and what it is that we would face without the Federal Reserve now in play with the massive inequality that we now face. There's no fixing the situation. So understanding the situation, especially through the eyes of that Federal Reserve, the book upon the Federal Reserve, right? The Creature from Jekyll Island, all that stuff is awesome. But if you take it in the theory that they are like this horrible institution that's trying to create pain and suffering to the people, you're totally going to see it. Absolutely see it. And then if you go with that belief, it makes it very difficult to then look at the monetary policy in a more neutral stance, right? To understand it for the reality of the situation as opposed to one of evil context. And that's really where I think, like, because the Creature from Jekyll Island totally opened my eyes. Like I was like, boom, man, now I'm studying the Fed. But the deeper I dove into it, the more I realized, and I'm looking back on stuff and I'm like, man, it was really damaging being the conspiracy theorist. Good. It was good for me because it opened my eyes to a lot of stuff that I felt that I was ignorant towards. But ultimately, it led me down a path of depression and failure and not low hope and stuff like that. So I don't know how beneficial that really was outside of the opening up of like the globalist mindset kind of thing that's happening out there for a lot of people, you know. You'll own nothing, be happy kind of stuff. That's why I laugh at it. I'm like, people were like, you'll own nothing to be happy. And I'm like, oh yeah, that one. Yeah, I know. I already did that. So that's cool. Yeah, I'm not scared. So let's continue on, let's move on and get ourselves on the other side of the wedge while everybody else suffers with the idea of eating bugs. All right. All right. Thank you, G. Edward Griffin. Absolutely. I've met G. Edward Griffin. Met him personally, sat down, had lunch with him at Hell's Kitchen in Vegas, got to speak on the same stage to the same audience. The dude is awesome. Dude is excellent, dude. His wife is awesome, Patricia. All right. It forces critical thinking skills being a conspiracy theorist. It does. And again, like, I think the failure in the conspiracy theorist mindset is literally the depressionary effects that come from it. Like if you're looking at it as if they're coming after you and you have no hope and it's all failure and it's misery and pain and suffering that we're all going to face, that's what you're going to find. You're going to find that in your life. You're going to find that in your outcome. And so it's better to recognize it for the reality that yes, it does exist. Yes, those people are out there, but no, I'm not going to suffer the consequences of that. Because I recognize what it is that I need to do and how I can position myself to be outside of that. And once you do, it makes it so much easier. Like you don't stress them. You just don't stress. Like I don't stress them. I'm like, New World Order, where are you? Like Red Rover, like I don't see it. Yeah, this is like I don't care. And when I have that sort of like understanding that I can't care about them coming after me, what I have to care about is me positioning myself to deal with the fact that there is an ever evolving, changing economy here that is not going back to the way it was. And I can't fix it to make it go back to the way it was. I have to understand it to the way it's going. All right, we will own nothing and be happy. See, this is the thing. Like, what is it? Like, I don't really own anything anyway. Like, what, I got a computer, an old Suburban here, I mean, a handful of possessions. Like, I really don't own anything. I mean, I guess this house, like I'm buying into that. It would suck to have that taken from me. It would suck to have the assets taken from me. It would suck to not have a position in which that I can secure a decent rate of interest beyond that of my occupation. But none of that stuff is my problem that is existing right now. I don't have any of that problem in my existence right now. And as people say, well, you will. And I was like, Your credible threat doesn't bother me, because I'm not worried about that. And if it does, I'm going to prepare myself to deal with the situation accordingly. But as of right now, I have nobody stopping me from securing a decent rate of interest beyond that of my occupation. There's literally nobody stopping me from doing that. There's nobody stopping you from doing it either. So, yeah, own nothing and be happy. I don't know. I mean, I already own nothing, man. I mean, let's just be happy. Happy's easier. Who cares about owning anything? Huh? What do you want to own anyway? You want a car that you have to maintain? Pretty soon you won't have to own a car. You can just beep beep and it shows up. Like don't who wants to own anything anyway? The only thing I want to own is a secure rate of interest beyond my occupation so that I can have a decent existence without having to stress about it. That's what I want. It doesn't have material possessions involved with that. Material possessions come and go. Who cares, right? But to have a secure rate of interest beyond that of your occupation, yeah, own nothing. As long as I can own that. Alright. Oh, what did I miss? Oh, man, bro. We've gone over so much stuff. You're going to have to hit the like button and then rewatch it. Alright. Build a lexicon, if nothing else, a base of launch from. Yeah. Will there come a time when credible threats don't work? You are a credible threat whistleblower. No, there's always going to be, like, the credible threat is always going to work because you can see how they're establishing them. You see how they line one up right after the other? I mean, here it was. We had the credible threat of COVID. We had the credible threat of war. We had the credible threat of terror. Like, some of them aren't just even credible. I mean, they're seriously credible. Like, Ukraine war, that's a serious thing happening out there. But think about how it was that it was exploited and how it is that people behaved with that exploited information. Just go back and look at all of them. The wall. Remember the wall? All right, what happened to the wall? All right, how about, let me think of another one. Keystone Pipeline, remember that one? That was a huge deal. What happened to Keystone? Anybody? Like, is that still the deal? I haven't heard that in, like, forever. Right? Lisa Cook, right? That was a recent one. Yeah, I don't know how many news articles I saw on Lisa Cook, and I was like, what's going to happen if you replace her? Anything? Nothing? Nothing at all? Because that's not how monetary policy operates. We replace one person doesn't do anything for the FOMC and the consensus statement. Right? These are all credible threats. They don't change anything, but they definitely change the people's perspective and their expectations and their beliefs. Especially if they don't have a powerful understanding of it ahead of time that says, that doesn't make any sense. All right? That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. But if you don't know, and most people don't, like literally, like how many people are actually going to understand how it is that the chairman of the Federal Reserve is literally just one vote on the FOMC with 11 other voting members, 5 alternates, 2 advisors? How many people out there actually know anything about the FOMC? Like, probably not even 1 out of 100. Like less than 1% of the population has any clue. And those are the ones who are actively trying to figure it out. Everybody else is just letting information get slammed at them, figuring that what they are hearing and seeing out there from the adult in the room, right, are correct. And it's not correct at all. I mean, I learned that lesson way back when the lumber industry was catching on fire and mills were burning up, and everybody said that's the reason why the lumber prices are so high. And I thought to myself, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But it was definitely a belief system out there, and they all thought for sure that was it. And when that wasn't it, it was manipulation and greed and suffering and all the other things that you want to put into it. But yet the uneducated economist accurately called it out well ahead of all those people who were calling manipulation and fear and greed and terrorism or whatever it is you wanted to put into it. None of that stuff made sense. What made sense was exactly what I was describing. And that's why I was so popular here on YouTube when it came to the lumber industry, is because I was calling it out accurately for the reality of the situation, not made up crap that people were just inventing, right? Artistic fantasies. All right. Market went up on COVID, Ukraine war, Israeli war, all that stuff, right? All right. Imagine how many people will move out of the country before winter of 2020. Wow, Larry in chat, you were a legend, man. You were good as MJ. Larry, who's that? Larry Bird. All right, you guys have fun. I just wanted to share this information with you about Jerome Powell possibly getting locked into his position permanently if the Senate decides that they do not want to vote the new chairman, or, you know, basically appoint a new chairman or qualify a new chairman into the position. The old chairman, regardless of the expiration of his term, cannot be removed. I mean, I guess he could be removed, but it's going to be a hell of a lot harder for Trump to exorcise him out of the machine, as the dead Powell who should have been gone is still there haunting his ass. That's going to be so funny. Larry Bird, do you really own the car? Ask me again in 75 years. Cruising up here. Are we done? I think we're done for the day, right? We got 41 minutes into this live stream with 105 people watching and 60 thumbs up. Thank you so much for hitting that thumbs up button. Thank you again for, you know, breaking this stuff down with me when it comes to understanding the credible threat theory. We by far have the most deepest accurate form of looking at monetary policy comparatively to anybody else out there. And it's really coming from the Fed's own words. It's not me trying to make this stuff up. It's me having found where the Federal Reserve communicated particular things that are not necessarily communicated out there through the mainstream media. And by breaking this stuff down and recognizing the current situation we face with monetary policy, it's easy for me to find stuff like this. Most people would not even thought that this would even have been a thing, and therefore would never have had the curiosity to dive deeper into it. Knowing that there's a credible threat that could be had, how is it that they deploy this credible threat? How do they use this credible threat? What information do you know ahead of time that then can be used for your advantage before the credible threat is deployed? You know, and this is what we're doing here. I love it. I think we're doing it better than anybody else. You know? All right. Thanks and have a good weekend. Well, thank you, Deja Vu. Federal Reserve equals Federal Express. Ghost in the machine. Good one. It really is, right? Powell's going to be haunting Trump for years to come on this one, or at least he could. I don't know if he will. But the credible threat of it being a possibility, and that's the reality of the situation. That's the one that we have to face, right? Or at least internalize. So that when they go like, oh man, Trump, you know, may, or like, Trump's going to fire Jerome Powell. And people are questioning that. But then all of a sudden, here's a credible threat of which Jerome Powell may have a permanently locked in position. I mean, think about the opposite view the markets would have of that. You could force these two. You want to ease financial conditions? Just put out information that questions the Fed independence. You want to tighten financial conditions? Just put out information that the Federal Reserve won't be bullied around, right? And then you'll have two different outcomes delivered to the economy in just that communication alone. And it's working. It works so well. All right, secure your assets. Good one. All right, sure are, Simon. Thank you again. Yep, thank you guys. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing the videos. Thank you for hitting the like button. Thank you for all the contributions and everything you do to support the Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.